Okay, let's jump right in. Ever been like cruising along in a relationship, feeling really good?
Yeah, things are going well.
Exactly. Maybe even thinking, this could be something special. And then, bam, the idea of forever, or maybe just the next step pops
Yeah.
up, and suddenly you feel like slamming on the brakes.
That sudden jolt of anxiety,
Yeah,
right?
that little flutter, or maybe not so little flutter. We're diving deep into what might be going on there today.
Definitely. That moment when um, deeper commitment triggers this unease
Hmm.
is, well, it's a really fascinating area.
So, what are we calling this?
So today we're unpacking the concept of fear of commitment. You might also hear it called gamophobia, specifically related to marriage.
Gamophobia sounds
It
serious.
can feel very serious for the person experiencing it. Our mission today is really to understand the core psychological and social elements at play.
Okay.
When someone feels this reluctance towards, long-term partnership or marriage, we're drawing from a source that explores these very aspects.
Got it. So, gamophobia sounds weighty. In simple terms, what are we actually talking about?
Well, essentially, it's an intense, sometimes almost irrational avoidance of that long-term partnership or marriage.
Okay.
And you also hear the broader term commitment phobia,
Yeah.
which can apply to, well, other kinds of commitments too, not just relationship.
Right.
But what's key here, I think, is that people experiencing this can still really enjoy parts of the relationship.
Like the companionship, the fun stuff.
Exactly. The connection, the day-to-day positives, they're not necessarily unhappy in the relationship itself.
Okay, so the problem isn't the person or the connection necessarily.
Not always. The challenge really arises as the relationship naturally moves towards, deeper levels of commitment.
That's the trigger point.
That seems to be it. That's when they might start to pull back, create distance, or just feel this really strong urge to withdraw.
Hmm.
It's this internal conflict, isn't it? Wanting connection, but um, fearing the deepening of it that
Hmm.
really defines this phenomenon. And our source material emphasizes that at its heart, this is seen largely as a psychological matter.
Okay, so let's get into those psychological roots then. Where do we start?
Well, a big one is something called attachment insecurity.
Attachment theory. Rings a bell. Bowlby.
That's the one. Bowlby's attachment theory basically says that as humans, we're kind of wired from an evolutionary standpoint to seek close emotional bonds.
Makes sense. Survival, connection.
Right. Think about babies early on. Our survival literally depends on those connections.
Okay.
Now, attachment insecurity can develop if the care we receive in infancy is, say, inconsistent, or maybe it doesn't fully meet our emotional needs.
So if things felt a bit shaky early on.
Precisely. And those early experiences can really shape how we approach and form intimate relationships later as adults.
So those very first bonds, they're like a foundation.
Exactly. Our source talks about this idea of an internal working model.
A blueprint, maybe.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. A blueprint for relationships that we start sketching out in infancy based on those early interactions with caregivers.
Wow, okay.
And the continuity hypothesis suggests this early blueprint tends to, well, stick with us.
Influencing future relationships.
Uh-huh. It shapes our expectations, our behaviors, how secure or insecure we feel in connections later on.
So if that early blueprint showed relationships as unstable or maybe unreliable,
Then the idea of a really stable, committed, long-term relationship in adulthood might feel inherently risky or just uncomfortable.
yeah, that follows.
Our source also mentions how anxious avoidant attachment in childhood. This is where maybe a child's needs for closeness are kind of dismissed.
Hmm.
That can sometimes lead to what's called avoidant dismissive attachment in adulthood.
Sounds complicated.
It does, but the core idea is about learning to distance yourself emotionally. It's like a coping mechanism.
Protecting yourself.
Sort of. The maternal sensitivity hypothesis, for instance, suggests that how caregivers respond to a child's needs really influences whether the child develops these avoidant behaviors.
Okay.
And over time, this can become a more ingrained style in adulthood.
Yeah.
So someone might engage in relationships, but only superficially, maybe.
Keeping emotional walls up.
Exactly. Especially when real intimacy or dependence starts to feel like a threat.
So it's like they learned early on getting too close equals potential pain or disappointment. So keep people at arm's length.
That's a good summary. And this feeds directly into the fear of commitment.
Right. How so?
Well,
Well-
if you learned early that your primary caregivers weren't always reliable or responsive,
Uh-huh.
you might unconsciously worry that future partners will be the same. that they'll let you down or won't be there when you need them.
And there's research on this.
Oh, absolutely. Research shows a pretty clear link between having a strong tendency to avoid intimacy and having lower commitment levels.
Driven by what?
Often, it seems driven by an underlying discomfort with depending on someone else, with that vulnerability.
Interesting. And our source mentions a specific study, Hazan and Shaver's Love Quiz, from quite a while back, 87.
Yes, a classic study. Hazan and Shaver basically took Bowlby's ideas about infant attachment and asked, okay, how does this apply to adult romantic love?
What did they find?
Their love quiz was quite revealing. For one, people who remembered having secure attachments as kids,
Yeah.
they were more likely to report having happier, more trusting, and longer-lasting romantic relationships as adults. No big surprise there,
Would
maybe.
make that make sense.
But, crucially for our topic, they also found that those with avoidant attachment styles often described feeling uncomfortable with closeness and intimacy.
Valuing independence more.
Very much so. They often prioritized independence. And this lines up perfectly with a fear of long-term commitment, doesn't it?
Yeah, because commitment requires interdependence.
Yeah, exactly. It requires vulnerability, relying on someone else. And the study also noted something about the anxious resistance style.
What was that?
Well, those individuals tend to worry a lot about abandonment, needing constant reassurance.
Okay.
They might also develop a fear of commitment, but perhaps for a slightly different reason, like the perceived high risk of rejection or the fear their needs won't be consistently met.
So different attachment styles can lead to commitment fears, but maybe through different pathways.
It seems that way.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, though, it looks like our early experiences really do kind of write the first chapter of our relationship playbook.
And those chapters heavily influence whether we feel safe turning the page to long-term commitment.
Well put. It definitely seems like those early years set a powerful trajectory.
But it can't all be about childhood, can it? What about our more recent experiences, like actual past relationships?
Yes, absolutely. Our source definitely touches on that too. It makes intuitive sense, right?
How so?
Well, think about it. If you've gone through a really tough breakup, maybe experienced some kind of trauma, or just a really sorrowful ending in a past relationship,
Yeah, that sticks with you.
it really can. And understandably, it might make you more hesitant, more cautious about fully investing emotionally again.
Afraid of getting hurt again.
Exactly. There might be a fear of repeating that pain, or maybe fear of betrayal, or just investing everything and not having it reciprocated.
It's that once bitten, twice shy feeling, but maybe on a much deeper level.
Precisely. And research does support this. Our past experiences strongly influence our future behavior and decisions.
So a string of bad endings could lead to avoiding commitment altogether.
It certainly could. If someone has a history of relationships ending badly, especially around points of deepening commitment, they might unconsciously start associating commitment itself with negative outcomes, with pain or failure.
Leading to a pattern of avoidance.
Yes, a pattern of pulling away when things start to get serious, almost as a protective measure based on past data.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like our brains are trying to keep us safe, using past experiences as evidence.
Right. Now, another psychological angle our source brings up is low self-esteem, lack of self-confidence. How does that fit in?
How does low self-esteem connect to fearing commitment?
Well, self-esteem is basically how we evaluate our own worth, right?
Yeah.
People with low self-esteem often struggle with feeling adequate or maybe feeling worthy of love.
No.
And this feeling of inadequacy can definitely feed into a fear of commitment.
In what way?
They might worry that they're simply not good enough to meet a partner's needs in the long run, or that they can't sustain a healthy, lasting relationship.
So it's a lack of confidence in themselves as a partner.
Exactly. It's less about fearing the partner and more about doubting their own ability to be a good, committed partner.
And the source mentions this can become a cycle.
Yes, a potentially negative feedback loop. The lack of self-confidence leads to holding back, maybe not fully committing, which unfortunately can sometimes contribute to the relationship not working out.
Which then confirms their original fear.
Exactly. It reinforces those feelings of inadequacy and strengthens the aversion to commitment next time around. It's a really tough cycle to break.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, so we've covered attachment, past experiences, self-esteem. What about broader social factors? Our source mentions family divorce.
Right. Shifting focus a bit to social psychology. Witnessing your parents' divorce, especially if it was unpleasant, that can definitely influence your views.
How so?
Well, sometimes, perhaps unintentionally, divorced parents might convey a more negative or pessimistic view of marriage,
Focusing on the difficulties?
maybe, expressing less optimism about the possibility of lasting, happy partnerships.
Yeah.
And kids absorb that.
Especially during childhood, which is such a key time for forming our basic ideas about relationships.
Absolutely. Growing up seeing conflict that leads to separation can sometimes lead a child to internalize this belief that, well, maybe couples just can't overcome significant conflict,
Like a learned helplessness about relationships.
perhaps. And some studies suggest that, particularly for women who experience parental divorce,
Yes.
there can be a noticeable decrease in confidence, maybe more ambivalence or uncertainty when they think about committing to a partner themselves.
So seeing it fail firsthand makes them more cautious.
It seems plausible. It really highlights how those early family dynamics, the blueprints we see, can shape our own approach down the line.
Definitely food for thought.
Hmm.
Now let's talk about the term itself. Commitment phobia. Where did that actually come from?
Ah, yes, the history. According to our source, the term really gained traction with a self-help book from 1987 called Men Who Can't Love.
Men who can't love. Okay, I can see how that might raise some eyebrows.
It did. It quickly drew criticism for being, well, kind of sexist, implying it was mostly a male issue.
Right. Did they address that?
The authors apparently tried to offer a more balanced view later in a 1995 book called He's Scared, She's Scared.
Trying to even it out. Are there other related terms we should know?
Yeah, the source mentions a couple. Scotophobia, that's specifically an aversion or fear related to marriage itself.
Okay, distinct from general relationship commitment.
Right. And then there's misogyny,
Or to
hatred of marriage as an institution. So again, different from a fear of commitment within a relationship, but related to negative views around marriage.
good to make those distinctions. Now, here's something I found really interesting. The source critiques the whole idea of framing this as a fear or phobia.
Yes, this is a really important point.
Yeah.
Using words like fear or phobia automatically carries a certain weight, a bias, doesn't it?
How do you mean?
It can inadvertently pathologize someone's choices, like choosing to stay single or deciding not to have children. Framing it as a phobia suggests it's irrational.
When it might be a perfectly rational choice for that person.
Exactly. It often fails to address the specific individual motivations, which might be quite logical.
The source gives an example related to the men's rights movement.
It does. It mentions how some within that movement use the term marriage strike.
Instead of fear of commitment.
Right. And that framing suggests that maybe declining marriage rates aren't about an irrational fear of intimacy, but perhaps, well, a rational response to certain perceived risks.
Like economic factors.
Yeah, things like potentially high divorce rates, the financial implications like alimony, child custody battles, the legal complexities.
So it reframes non-commitment as a calculated assessment of risk, not just an emotional avoidance.
Precisely. It shifts the lens from just individual psychology to include rational considerations of potential negative outcomes.
That's a very different perspective.
It is. And the source also nods to other related societal factors.
Like what?
Things like alimony laws themselves, the fact that bachelorhood is maybe more accepted now, the real consequences of divorce, cultural trends like lad culture, even historical context like the term old maid.
Wow, lots of context there.
And of course, the huge impact of the sexual revolution on relationship norms.
Mm.
It all paints a much more complex picture than just fear.
It suggests society itself shapes these choices too.
Definitely. And the source brings in Bella DePaula's work on singlism.
What's singlism?
It's about the stigmatization or negative stereotyping of single people.
Ah, okay.
So DePaula's work suggests that maybe choosing not to marry or commit long-term could even be seen as a rational response to avoid societal pressure or stigma, rather than just being about individual fear.
Resisting the pressure to couple up.
Could be part of it for some.
Yeah.
It really challenges us to think beyond just assuming it's a phobia.
It really does make you reconsider labeling everything as a fear. Seems like a much richer tapestry of reason.
I think so.
Okay, so as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, what are the main takeaways? What are the big factors contributing to this reluctance towards commitment?
Well, we've definitely seen that psychological factors seem significant. Things like insecure attachment styles stemming from early childhood.
Right, that internal blueprint.
Exactly. And also negative past relationship experiences, getting hurt and being hesitant to risk it again.
Makes sense.
Low self-esteem, too. That feeling of inadequacy,
Yeah.
doubting your ability to be a good partner.
Yeah.
And then there's the social piece, like witnessing difficult parental divorce, which can shape views on marriage's viability.
So, several potential psychological and social roots.
Definitely. But, and this is crucial,
Yeah.
it's so important to remember what we just discussed. It's not always about an irrational fear.
Right. That label can be too simplistic.
Hugely. The decision to commit or not is incredibly complex. It's influenced by a whole host of things.
Like social factors, economic realities.
Absolutely. Conscious lifestyle choices, personal values, rational assessments of risk. These are all significant too.
So just slapping the label phobia on it can be dismissive.
It really can be.
Yeah.
It overlooks the individual circumstances, their rational thought processes, and the wider societal context they're living in.
Okay. So considering all these different angles, the psychological roots, the past hurts, the self-doubt, but also the rational choices and societal pressures. Here's a final thought for everyone listening. How might our understanding of relationships and commitment itself evolve if we moved beyond just instinctively labeling reluctance as fear?
Good question.
What other motivations, maybe personal ones, maybe societal shifts, might be really influencing relationship choices today? Things that deserve perhaps a closer look and a more nuanced understanding than just fear.